Coming up next on Hawaii Now, Congressman Neil Abercrombie introduces a bill to create a national research program that would help determine exactly what effects pollution, sonar, and other human actions have on marine mammals.
We need to have research that's scientifically sound.
He announces the legislation on the first day of whale counting season in Hawaii. Also coming up, Congressman Abercrombie says the U.S. military's ability to respond to any new threat at home or abroad is in a crisis.
The Army is in trouble. It has serious readiness problems and has massive unfunded bills.
That's why he's co-sponsoring legislation to restore and to maintain ground forces in the interest of national security. That's coming up on Hawaii Now with Congressman Neil Abercrombie. A group of volunteers at Diamond Head Lookout is taking part in the start of a winter ritual in Hawaii, whale counting. It's estimated that 4,000 to 5,000 endangered humpback whales may visit Hawaiian waters every year from November to May, and on this day the counting begins.
We've been out here counting since 8 o'clock this morning. About 8:30 we had one giant breach. It was a large breach. After that we've had about one other breach and then 3 sightings of calves. So we've had 3 breaches of a calf, and it may have been the same calf playing, but he was coming completely out of the water. Then we've had a monk seal, but today's being kind of windy. It's been hard to see the action that's there, but we're sure they're there. We've seen them outside of the water now.
Each year at this time, the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary, part of NOAA, the federal government's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, organizes this count of humpbacks. It's the first of 3 counting days spanning January, February, and March at more than 60 sites around Oahu, Kauai, Hawaii Island, and Kaho'olawe. Another independent count takes place on Maui. The count helps raise public awareness for humpbacks and the marine environment. It also gathers information on the humpback's population and distribution.
We've got about 30 volunteers that showed up today to help us look for whales, record their behaviors. We're also looking at site visibility so that we can do the comparisons across years.
Nearly 2/3 of the entire North Pacific population of humpback whales migrates to Hawaii each winter. They come here for breeding, calving, and nursing, which is critical to the survival of their species. The sanctuary is one of only 13 national marine sanctuaries.
Our volunteers will be out here till 12:15, so they've been here from 8:15 to 12:15. We have about 24 around there sites that are being covered on Oahu. We also have sites that are being surveyed on the island of Kauai and the Big Island. So overall, we're looking at approximately 60 sites. Throughout the counts, we have about 2,000 volunteers who help us out with this effort.
The sanctuary is also home to an array of marine animals, corals, and plants. Some are found nowhere else on Earth. The sanctuary is comprised of 5 separate areas abutting 6 of the major islands of the state of Hawaii. The 5 areas of the sanctuary cover relatively shallow offshore areas, the only place in U.S. coastal waters where humpbacks reproduce.
International organizations will have much more confidence now.
Today's count is the backdrop for an announcement by Congressman Neil Abercrombie, an honorary site leader here at Diamond Head. He's announcing the introduction of new legislation creating a national research program to focus on the effects of human actions such as pollution and the use of sonar on marine mammals in the world's oceans.
Well, there couldn't be a more appropriate place to announce a bill on marine mammal research to be put in the Mammal Commission in order to get interagency cooperation. The problem right now is, as evidenced by the Consortium on Ocean Leadership, that there's literally dozens and dozens of groups and agencies that are involved in marine mammal research. We have lots of arguments going on in the courts, the military trying to use sonar, judges issuing injunctions, all based on knowledge we don't have.
Abercrombie's bill would establish the National Marine Mammal Research Program with $25 million in annual funding. The bill will coordinate and strengthen scientific research into natural and human-related factors affecting the health of marine mammals and their habitats. The program would be administered by the Marine Mammal Commission, an independent federal agency.
So what I'm trying to do with this bill, and I have the support, I think literally of all of the agencies and all of the groups that are interested in the ocean and marine mammal research, is to put it together under the commission, an interagency commission that will coordinate the research, process the money, put it all through a non-political agency. The idea here is to make certain, not that anybody gets cut out, but rather that we take the politics out of marine mammal research, get the knowledge that we need to be able to protect not only humpback whales, but all the marine mammals over which we have jurisdiction and for which we have a trust relationship as human beings, and most particularly for Hawaii. The humpback whale sanctuary, as you know, is succeeding almost beyond everybody's, not their hopes, but certainly their expectations. And for precisely that reason, we need to have research that's scientifically sound. We need to have confidence that we are not getting information and viewpoints that are politically motivated. And so there's always the suspicion that if the military, for example, is sponsoring the research, that they'll have a bias in that direction. Or if it's a particular environmental group, that they'll have a bias in their direction. So by putting it under an independent agency that is by definition a coordinating agency, and taking the politics out of it, we think that we're going to be able to do marine mammal research that will have meaning and give us a direction that will have success in the preservation of marine mammals.
I mean, you have a lot of musical instruments playing, and you're going to try to
Yes.
get a conductor to make music.
Good question. The question was, there's a lot of musical instruments here, and can we get a conductor to do it? And that's really what this will be. The commission will be a neutral body. Many of the agencies that are supporting, that will support this bill and are supporting it, already work with each other and work through the commissions, the Marine Mammal Commission. So this will codify who's in charge. It'll give a sense of direction to the research and a vehicle for the funding that everybody will I think agree is non-political.
Expanded and focused research, says Abercrombie, is critical so we can obtain real, hard scientific evidence that will truly help us understand the effects of humankind on all marine mammals, such as the humpback. The same evidence is needed, he says, to settle a continuing legal dispute that questions the effects of sonar on the behavior of whales.
In the court proceedings that are being undertaken right now, nobody really knows what they're talking about. They have their points of view, but there's no scientific basis for it. And so I'm trying to maximize the information that people can trust, and you have to do it institutionally. Otherwise, you're left with one side accusing the other, or one group putting forward its agenda, and then you have to try and pick and choose among agendas rather than being able to make a determination whether you think there was good scientific basis for the analysis that's being presented.
Abercrombie says his legislation will also help us to learn more about the effects of fishing nets, pollution, disease, environmental changes, and other threats on marine mammals. Our nation has provided lots of funding for space exploration, he says, but not enough on inner space, which is vital to our complete understanding of the universe and the preservation of its threatened and endangered species. His new bill has received a strong endorsement by the Consortium for Ocean Leadership based in Washington, D.C., which includes the University of Hawaii, where Dr. Paul Nachtigal leads research into the hearing of marine mammals. The consortium is a non-profit that represents 95 of the leading public and private ocean research education institutions, aquaria, and private groups. Its mission is to advance research, education, and sound ocean policy, and manages ocean research and education programs in areas such as scientific drilling, observing, and exploration in the oceans. The consortium says it supports the improved coordination in research that the bill would produce and development of a national priority plan for mammal research.
Because it creates a national marine mammal research program administered by the Marine Mammal Commission. Everybody recognizes that there has to be someone in charge or some group in charge that can be trusted as being non-biased. Politics, yes. Bias, we think we're getting rid of.
While Congressman Abercrombie works the halls of Congress to get the needed support and votes he'll need to pass the legislation, the whale counting back home will continue in the waters of the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary. Volunteer Edwina Dottie will be returning to her post at Diamond Head to count humpbacks and gather some data, along with lots of memories. Dottie's been involved in this count for 8 years, the last 4 years as a site leader. She recalls one of her most memorable sightings involving a whale performing the peduncle slap. That's when a whale throws its tail out of the water and slaps the surface with its peduncle, the narrow part of the body leading to the tail.
And he did it like 35 times. I mean, we couldn't believe it. We were standing here watching, just going 1, 2, 3, 4. We were all just counting away, and he was just there slapping and slapping and slapping.
Those kinds of memories bring back the volunteers each year, but more are always needed. If you're interested but aren't sure what to look for during a whale count, Connie McCurdy is ready to show you.
We're up here at Diamond Head Lookout, and we are just waiting to see a whale breach. And breach! Oh, another breach! Tail flap, tail flap, tail flap. Okay, let's see if we can see a peck flap. Oh, peck flap. Traveling, traveling, traveling. Fluke dive, fluke dive, fluke dive. Another tail flap. Spy hop.
What's that again?
Spy hop. That's when they stay straight out of the water and they go around. Okay, mommy is swimming with the calf. And mommy is nursing with the calf because the whales come to Hawaii for 3 reasons: to have their calves, to nurse, and to mate. And they stay just underneath the water to do that. I'm going back to Alaska. And that's the show.
Sanctuary Superintendent Naomi McIntosh encourages more folks to join the ranks of volunteers whose work helps the endangered humpbacks and public awareness about this endangered species to flourish.
They want to make sure that humpback whales are enjoyed for generations to come, and so all of this excitement for our whales is really helpful. I mean, these are people that are stewards of our marine environment. Not only are they involved in protecting humpback whales, but a lot of our volunteers are also volunteering to protect other resources as well. So our monk seals, we have people here that help with just beach watches, making sure that those monk seals aren't disturbed by animals that might be loose. And so there's a lot of things going on here today, and we're just really excited to have Congressman here supporting us and helping us kick off our first ocean count for the year. You know, being in Hawaii, I was born and raised here. You know, these resources are really our legacy. It's what Hawaii's all about. It's what makes this place special. And you know, I think that a lot of times we don't realize the importance of these resources, the resources that we have here. We don't see a lot of these resources because a lot of them are found farther offshore. So I think people protect what they learn to understand and love. And so just building awareness about the resources that we have is really, really important, because I think that helps people to understand that these resources are present here. And once they find out about them, obviously, you know, they learn to care about them quite a bit.
This is Hawaii Now with Congressman Neil Abercrombie. Congressman Neil Abercrombie says Congress must take a hard look at the state of U.S. military readiness, which he says is in a crisis because of troop deployments to Iraq. He says the crisis is so serious that the military is severely limited to responding effectively to any new threat at home or abroad. He's urging fellow lawmakers to begin discussing the needs of the military and future role it should play around the world as the country addresses the crisis.
Army readiness is at a crisis point. The National Guard is stripped bare of equipment, and 2 ongoing wars are costing the Army more by the day.
This warning comes from a lawmaker who's had a clear view of this issue. Abercrombie is chairman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Air and Land Forces. The subcommittee oversees the operations, budget, and equipment and weapons procurement of the Air Force and Army. He's also a member of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Sea Power, which oversees the Navy and Marine Corps. He's joined Congressman Solomon Ortiz, chairman of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Readiness, in co-sponsoring a resolution on the issue.
I think it's pretty important that we concentrate on those who are bearing.
The measure calls on Congress to restore and to maintain ground forces at the highest levels of readiness in the interest of national security and integrity of the military. He spoke about the readiness crisis during an interview in Washington, D.C.
Well, I'm working with other subcommittee chairmen in the Armed Services Committee on readiness. What readiness means is are you prepared with the equipment? Are you prepared with the personnel? Do you have the proper training? Do you have the right numbers so that you can carry out these deployments, carry out these missions? And the problem is that we've been deploying soldiers, including the Guard and Reserve, at such a rate and so many times that we now have a readiness crisis, and it literally is a crisis. We don't have the pre-positioned stocks of weapons and equipment. We don't have the sufficient training and personnel to make any of our units in the United States Army in particular up to the readiness standards, the preparedness standards that we want. If that's going to take place, we've got to concentrate on that.
Congressman Abercrombie says the Army has had to extend combat deployments in Iraq just to maintain the current force level. The Army also has had to pay bonuses of up to $40,000 per soldier to retain highly trained personnel. And the Marine Corps has had to call 2,500 reservists to active duty so units in Iraq could be fully staffed. The redeployment pinch, Abercrombie notes, has hit Hawaii troops especially hard.
For every 1,000 National Guards people that have been put into service, 976 out of 1,000 in Hawaii have been deployed, more than any other state. Now, that's partially because of the particular talents and the particular professional focus that they have. But because of that, that means our people have to go again and again and again. And don't forget, these are civilian soldiers. That is to say, they're civilians all the time, and they are soldiers part-time. But we're using them as if they were full-time soldiers. They have to be deployed again and again. And that kind of preparedness is what constitutes the readiness crisis. This is taking place in all 50 states. We're trying to pretend that we have a sufficient number of troops with the correct amount of equipment, training, and preparedness, and we don't.
They think they were women.
Congressman Abercrombie says the number of troops has to be increased. Right now, 2/3 of Army units in the United States are not combat ready because of severe shortages in equipment, training, and troops. Abercrombie says the central question Congress and the American people must answer is what should the nation's military role be in the world in the long-term future?
Well, what's going to happen with the National Guard eventually is people are simply not going to be able to continue in it. It has nothing to do with determination or professionalism or loyalty. It has everything to do with the fact that they will not be able to conduct their civilian lives in a manner that's going to bring any stability to their families or to any state, let alone Hawaii. Inevitably, the numbers who will be signing up for the Guard or staying in the Guard are bound to decline.
Abercrombie's resolution says the Army has had to lower service standards to create a higher number of eligible personnel. Combat operations overseas have decreased the useful life of ground and aviation equipment. The destruction or damage of equipment in battle has depleted the equipment inventory. And due to time limitations, many Army units, the resolution says, are skipping training prior to deployment overseas. This has impacted the National Guard's inventories and endangered the Guard's ability to respond to emergencies here at home. Given the current state of military readiness, Congressman Abercrombie warns that the United States is not prepared to face any new threats.
You have to increase what's called the end strength, the absolute numbers for the Marine Corps and the Army. And as long as it's volunteer, that means you're going to have to provide substantial bonuses. You're going to have to take into account what the politics are. The Army doesn't deploy itself. The Marine Corps doesn't deploy itself. It's politicians and political decisions that are behind those efforts. And so it's not a question of the National Guard. It's not a question of the active duty military. It's a question of what is the political will behind it. Do we want to continue to police the world? And if that's a decision that's going to be made politically, we have to back it up substantially with the numbers and the readiness behind it to sustain that. Now, that's a conversation we need to have. It's a national security crisis because we're presuming that there's as the president and others who are so hawkish on these wars and these police actions all around the world have said, well, the military option's on the table. Well, the option isn't on the table if the military isn't prepared. So as chairman of one of the subcommittees of the Armed Services Committee with particular responsibility for the Army, I have to say, regardless of my own view as to how the Army should be utilized or whether it should be deployed, setting aside those political decisions, my responsibility and obligation is to see that that military is ready for whatever contingency we place in them. And they are not ready right now. Not because they don't want to be, but because we haven't provided for them. We have not had an honest conversation in this country in some time as to what we expect of our military, and more importantly, what we expect of ourselves to support the military if we're going to use it. Because of the deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan right now, we do not have a plausible deterrent capacity, whether it's in regard to the usual names that are put forward, North Korea, Iran. Now we're setting up an African command. God knows what that's going to involve if we get into conflicts involving American soldiers in any great numbers in Somalia or in the Horn of Africa, in the Niger Delta. There are other hot spots all around the world. We're even talking now about providing assistance to Mexico to try to clean up corruption in their military. I mean, we have to have a serious conversation in this nation about just what do we expect out of the military. Are we the new Rome? Are we a worldwide empire expected to police and militarize the entire world with a volunteer army, particularly Army troops, Guard and Reserve, and a Marine Corps alone? While the rest of us watch the Super Bowl or go to movies or don't really want to be bothered by anything other than what comes over television? We've got to be serious about this. Lives are at stake. Families are at stake. The capacity of the United States to be seriously engaged in the world other than militarily is at stake. It is expensive, but it's expensive to engage in these wars, these endless deployments, without taking into account what really is going to be necessary in order to accomplish it. We can't do this on the cheap, and we can't do it on television. You can't observe a finite number of soldiers, whether they're active duty or in the Guard and Reserve, doing this over and over again. It's not a television repeat. It's not being done on tape. This is being done in real time by real people. And we have to acknowledge what is involved in that and deal with it accordingly. Congress has to have a conversation with itself and with the American people about what level of readiness do we want? What do we expect out of our military in terms of the political decisions that are being made? We haven't had that conversation. We've simply sent the military out, active duty, Guard and Reserve, and expected them again and again and again to make up for the fact that we haven't decided what kind of a country we want to be.
The House leadership says Congress is unswerving in its support for the troops. That means raising readiness levels for all units by increasing their numbers and training and meeting equipment needs. Abercrombie says rebuilding the U.S. military won't happen overnight, but he says there's been a lack of debate on the issue, and that debate must begin now. This is Hawaii Now with Congressman Neil Abercrombie. A look back at a subcommittee hearing on Capitol Hill shows us the hard choices lawmakers faced in crafting a defense budget that meets the Army's immediate needs.
The Army is in trouble. It has serious readiness problems and has massive unfunded bills for repairing equipment damaged in combat, adding more troops to its ranks, and finishing its modular force conversion. This situation requires dramatic action to prevent further decay of the Army over the next 2 years.
The Army's state of readiness has been a major focus of Congressman Neil Abercrombie's House Armed Services Subcommittee on Air and Land Forces. During hearings that examined the 2008 Defense Department budget, the subcommittee, under Abercrombie's leadership, worked to balance the immediate and future needs of the Army.
I want to emphasize at this point that we have an obligation, I think in the judgment here, not on a completely nonpartisan basis, to take care of the Army in its present circumstances.
Abercrombie said the overall state of the Army, the active guard and reserves, has changed in the last 2 years, and deliberate steps must be taken to restock. However, the Army, at the same time, wants to complete its most ambitious restructuring plan since World War II. It's a plan that would convert the Army into more mobile, self-sufficient modular units that may be deployed more rapidly. All of this presents a dilemma.
The problem is that the Army simply has too many bills to pay and not enough funding to cover all of them. I wish this wasn't the case, and the Army had a higher top line so that these difficult choices wouldn't be made.
Abercrombie stressed that the Army's immediate needs must be met first, but in order to do that, his subcommittee had to reallocate funding from a program called Future Combat Systems, or FCS. That's the Army's modernization program that would build a family of manned and unmanned systems to help equip the Army's modular force with the latest technologies.
By the end of the fiscal year 2007, the Army will have spent $11 billion on the Future Combat System and have not a single operational system to show for it. They have a few prototypes. Army readiness is at a crisis point. The National Guard is stripped bare of equipment, and 2 ongoing wars are costing the Army more by the day, costing them not just in dollars but in terms of personnel. How can the Army justify spending $3.66 billion in 2008 for a system that doesn't deliver fully until 2015? 2 independent analyses that I have seen have determined that the Army is probably off by at least 50% in its estimate of the total development costs of the FCS. It has risen almost exponentially from the original estimates.
Abercrombie says Congress articulates our nation's defense policy, authorizes all operations of the U.S. Department of Defense, and sets priorities for defense spending. As the leader of the Air and Land Forces Subcommittee, he shares the job of finding the proper balance between immediate and future needs. He says that requires making tough choices. And that's Hawaii Now with Congressman Neil Abercrombie.